everyone. This is Eric Rodriguez, Director of Digital Marketing at CBI, and this is our virtual workshop on the MITRE ATT&CK Framework. I'm joined today by Shaun Bertrand, Vice President of CBI's Red Team, who will give us the overview. I'll cover a couple of housekeeping items, and then we'll jump into the workshop in earnest. So, Shaun, thank you for being our host and key presenter today. Why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Well, thank you very much, Eric. We are here to talk about something that I am, extremely passionate about, which is the MITRE ATT&CK Framework. It's something that I have kind of evangelized over the last 2 years or so, and I'm excited to talk to you today about how this framework can help really transform an organization's ability to more effectively detect and prevent some of these advanced TTPs that are going on today. So this workshop is presented to you by AT&T Cybersecurity. All right, let's talk a little bit about the goals that we want to accomplish here today. I want to talk to you a little bit about what we believe to be a major gap that most companies face in regards to vulnerability and risk management. We want to talk to you and enable you to understand more about what this MITRE ATT&CK Framework is, what its value is, and how you can leverage it and operationalize it to reduce the risk against these probable attacks. Our agenda is going to be relatively informal here today. As some of you may know me and some of you may not, I'm a really informal guy. I want to keep it informal. I want to, again, talk about some of the value, how to implement it, how to prioritize it, how do we report this data up to the C-levels and the executives in a way that shows meaningful advancements and progress as a result of leveraging this framework. And then what we'll do is we'll take this little 5-minute break and we'll come back and show you a proof of concept workshop, kind of show you this thing in action, run a couple little attacks here, and go through that workflow. So I'll get this slide out quick, a little bit about me. The best way I introduce myself is I've been in the industry for a long time, about 25 years, and even to the day I am still extremely passionate about cybersecurity. So I run the Red Team here at CBI. I have been at CBI for 18 years, have ran the Red Team for 12 years. Today we're a group of about 15 Jedi Knight rock stars that help organizations identify advanced and sophisticated vulnerabilities in their environment and to remediate those things swiftly. I've got some experience teaching. I love the ISSA chapter that I helped form here in Grand Traverse. I live up north in northern Michigan. I'm a member of the Michigan Cyber Civilian Corps, and in my free time, I do a little bit of bug bounty hunting. Those are my two boys. That picture's old. Yeah, the picture was taken back when they were getting ready to go to their first day of kindergarten, and how I wish they were back in school right now for so many different reasons. But let's talk a little bit about CBI. CBI has been frustrating cyber criminals since 1991, all right? This is a company that's been in business for over 30 years. I often describe our organization as a company that cybersecurity isn't something that we do, it's all that we do. It is represented by a group of extremely passionate resources that love what they do, all right? We pride ourselves on our core values. We're authentic. We don't try to be anything to anybody that we are not. We always put our customers first. We've got this blue collar work ethic where none of us are afraid to roll up our sleeves and get the job done no matter what's asked. And we pride ourselves on being a performance-based culture. We gauge our success on what our customers tell us. This is our framework here at CBI. And so what I think is important here is you look at the verticals down below. We cover everything from assessments, advising, integration, and management throughout this very wide ecosystem that we have to support. Your data, your IP, and your brand is centric to that framework. All right, let's get started. So exposing the gap. All right, here's the thing. I believe that vulnerability management for most companies is not working. I believe that because I have, our organization has done 1,600 plus penetration testing engagements. We've been, involved at the ground level in understanding vulnerability and risk management programs. And what we're finding is a lot of companies invest a lot of time into vulnerability scanning as part of the core competency of their vulnerability management program. But sometimes that represents a misconstrued view. All right, so That misconstrued view is dangerous. Now, what you're looking at here is a completely arbitrary and subjective pie chart. There's no data behind this other than my own kind of intuition. I believe that vulnerability scanning represents a very disproportionate view of the amount of risks in your environment. When it comes to the attacks that the actual malicious adversaries are going to take, they're going to focus in on not that 30%. They're going to focus in on the other heavy hitting, harder to detect, more strategic tactics, techniques, and procedures. And most organizations don't have a good view of that. So when you talk about threat hunting, customers need to take a threat-centric approach, all right? So this is the typical pyramid of pain for those that haven't seen this. Basically what this is an understanding of the challenges an organization faces to detect certain attacks and indicators of compromise throughout that attack lifecycle. So at the bottom, you see things like hash values and IOCs. Those are easy, right? Those are trivial to detect. IP addresses and domain names, those are relatively easy to identify as well. As you move up that chart though, or that triangle, things get a little tougher, right? Network host artifacts, that's just annoying. The tools that these adversaries are using, now that's where it gets challenging and really tough to detect. But when you get to the top, the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that these adversaries are using, it's the most extremely challenging part of a threat hunter's job. And this is where the attack framework comes into play. So one thing I like to talk about is what I see with many SOC teams, not all right, but with a lot of SOC teams, this is what I see. And for those that like Mel Brooks and Spaceballs, you might get a kick out of this. But I think that when I see a lot of the SOC teams that we deal with, they are combing the desert looking for threats. They don't know where to look. They really don't know how to look. They're trying to boil the ocean in so many different ways and trying to find attackers in their environment outside of the normal notifications and controls that they may have. Meanwhile, you got MegaMade here stealing all of your data, or in this case, stealing all your air when the SOC team is not properly focused, aimed, and trained to look through the lenses that they need to in order to identify the malicious adversary. Kudo points to anybody who knows the password to the airlock there for the MegaMade attack. Same combination on my luggage. All right, let's talk about what this MITRE ATT&CK Framework is. A lot of words on a slide for me. I don't like a lot of words on a slide, but I want you to kind of saturate this best you can. ATT&CK is the adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge framework. All right, it's used as the foundation to develop a threat model. It's basically the blueprint. And let's just go to the next slide. This is the framework. All right, it is a blueprint of every which way a malicious adversary will go about compromising an environment. All right, over on the left, you have things like initial access and execution and persistence. So over as you move through, you go through things like lateral movement and privilege escalation techniques, covering your tracks, exfiltrating data, and establishing command and control functionality. This is, for the first time, an opportunity for organizations to understand the ways that an adversary will go about going through your network. And today, you know, as an example, with all the things we're dealing with remote access, that initial access category is something that most organizations should be focusing in on. So let's dive into our first polling question here. I want to understand your familiarity with ATT&CK. I talked to a lot of people. Some people have no familiarity at all. Some people have some relative familiarity, and some people have absolutely zero knowledge.
Shaun, I'm with you, as I've been, alongside this MITRE ATT&CK Framework campaign for the last several months, kind of surprised to see the blend of people who are either, familiar completely with the MITRE ATT&CK Framework versus people who kind of have an understanding, but don't necessarily have the in-depth knowledge or the impact that it has on their business.
Very true. I think what you'll see is a mix of, even at the enterprise space or the SMB space, it's possible, it's achievable. These are things that we can do, and you'll see here moving forward some of the slides that we use to kind of reinforce that you don't have to have an advanced red team here to do this, and that drives some people's familiarity with this framework.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and close the poll, show the results.
Relative familiarity seems to be the majority win there. So good stuff overall. I'm glad that those that don't have any familiarity here should gain some value, and even those with some, strong familiarity. I believe that you're going to get a ton of value into how to operationalize this thing if you're not already. Some of the evolution that the framework is taking, amongst a few other different areas. So let's talk about implementation. All right. So again, we're going to keep it simple here for the most part. How do I implement the MITRE ATT&CK Framework? Well, the simple answer is that we run the attacks and we map our findings. Now, that's the easy answer, all right? But what we need to do is to be able to apply some scoring mechanisms, and we need to be able to have something to start with. So let's go there. There's a number of different opportunities for organizations to either A, create their own simple little Excel spreadsheet, to having something more of a commercialized product that will help you operationalize this thing. But what you need to do when you start the early steps of implementation is understand your scoring mechanisms. So over there on the left here, what you'll see are some trivial or kind of just first run level scoring mechanisms. So was it logged? Did we get a partial alert? Did we get a full alert where we saw the bells and whistles going off, which is kind of what we're going for? We don't want to see some log buried in a pile of other logs. Did we not see it at all? Did we prevent it? Did we prevent and alert it? Or did we just not have the ability to test it and it was not applicable? So those scoring mechanisms can be a very rudimentary introduction to being able to correlate your organization's ability to detect and prevent these very probable and very common types of attacks here. All right. What you're looking at is, we've helped companies operationalize the MITRE ATT&CK Framework, and this is part of the framework that we've developed. It's just a simple understanding of being able to build some averages and correlation. So as you run these attacks, and we're going to show you more here later, you might rank in certain areas. You might have, used your antivirus control to detect something, but your EDR tool identified something that the AV tool didn't. So now what we have is the ability to correlate these scores to understand things based on the technique that's run, in addition to the control effectiveness against these attacks. And you're going to hear me talk about control effectiveness a lot. So what I want you to do is kind of visualize how this might look. And this is what I recommend for most companies is, crawl, walk, run. What you're seeing here is a spreadsheet, obviously, that what we've done is identify what we feel to be the most probable attacks that most customers face. And those are the ones that are surrounded in that red border, all right? Then what we do is we run these attacks and we rank what their ability was to detect and prevent these things. So those areas that are in red shading, we ran the attack and we did not have any notifications or alerts or insight that this attack was going on. Those in blue shading, they do. Those were things where we had the blinking bells and sirens going off and everything that alerted us to some of these attack techniques that are being used. So imagine now having some level of visual representation, just a little map that you could keep in your office that shows you how you're tracking and progressing. You can just look up there and hopefully see a lot of blue, right? That's the goal, all right? And these probable attacks, they vary, all right? We're going to talk about threat modeling a little bit and how you can build a more viable approach to probable attacks based on information from many reputable sources out there like Red Canary and others that can give you a more defined understanding of the attacks that your industry vertical may face. All right, so prioritization is a great segue to this. Man, MITRE ATT&CK, it's like an inch high and a mile long, right? And we're going to talk about some of the evolution it's taking with sub-techniques here, and that is also a little daunting. But you got to do a little threat modeling, and threat modeling is such an overused term, but we're gonna walk you through the way that you can initially, take a first stab at this with some rudimentary threat modeling, understanding your industry, what attackers are out there, what they're going to go after, and what TTPs they're going to leverage to do that. There's certainly a crawl, walk, run approach that we're going to take there as well. Okay. What do I need to make this thing work? The first thing that most companies say is, I don't have an advanced red team, so I can't do this. That's not true. You don't need an advanced red team. You can have anybody from a standard security analyst to an advanced red teamer, but maybe not even that. You might just have a very knowledgeable IT resource or network admin, or somebody has, the acumen a little bit on the security side of things. And when you couple that with some of the automated tools that are out there that we're going to talk about later, you've got a meaningful approach to kick this thing forward. Okay, so don't believe that you need to have a great, sophisticated set of skills in-house to be able to do this. You do need some detection capabilities, all right? And detection capabilities are obviously important, but it's again the same thing. You don't have to have the sun, the moon, and the stars. You may not have the perfect, blend of EDR, SIM, endpoint, firewall, IDS. You might not have everything, okay? But what you really need to make this successful, at least effective, is to have some type of EDR or SIM solution in your environment. It makes it a lot easier because those tools are going to be better positioned to give you the insight on actual attacks going on at your organization. I'm going to give you some examples later on how, even using something traditional as Windows Defender can still give you insight and give you the opportunity to operationalize this thing in the way that we're talking about, right? Prevention capabilities. Optional at this stage for most companies who are just getting into trying to get this thing off the ground. I believe that detection, and if people were in the same room with me, they might throw something at me, I don't know. I believe detection is more important than prevention, all right? I believe you need to have a solidified detection and maturity capability before you start worrying and putting all your eggs in the prevention basket. Prevention is great, prevention works. But if you're just preventing things and not detecting it and not notifying the SOC or the resources that something is going on, well, there's improvement opportunity there. In addition, as a malicious adversary, and even as our red team works through exploiting and escalating our privileges in an environment and gaining a further foothold, we're going to follow a specific attack path as well. The ones that we know that work, the ones that we know are reputable, they're covert. But we're going to run through a series of those, and it doesn't mean that all 100% of those are going to be successful. We might run something like Mimikatz as an example. We don't use it too much anymore. We use some other tools for that, but Mimikatz might be ran, and it might not have been detected. But then maybe something later on down the road was detected, and now you as an individual or organization have the ability to identify there's an attacker in my environment, and they've already made it past the initial access into lateral movement. I've got to jump, I got to do something. So that's why we feel this framework is instrumental to enhancing detection and notification capabilities. All right, let's move on to our second polling question here. I want to gain an understanding of your capabilities to run simulated attacks in your environment. Do you not have any capability to run attacks? Do you rely on third parties and outsource red teams? Do you have internal security analysts? Or maybe you have your own internal advanced red teams?
Shaun, what do you usually see out there in terms of people's ability to run these attacks and do the detection? What I like here about your presentation is it sounds like you're helping people build a lot of confidence, even if they don't have the advanced level teams in place.
That is so true. Yeah, what we generally see is kind of a mix of everything, but generally most companies in the SMB space will have very limited capabilities, or they're reliance on third parties, which is okay. When you move into the higher tier of SMB and into the enterprise space, that's obviously we're going to see a dedicated security team. And in some of the best run operations or organizations, you'll see an advanced red teams paired with blue teams. But those are certainly the anomalies. We love to see that, but we don't see it enough.
All right, sounds good. Well, I'm going to close this poll and share the results. And it looks like what we're seeing here in our group today is pretty consistent.
That is right. Most people have security analysts that do some testing. They're not considered red team level. And guess what? That group is well positioned to kick this thing off. They are going to be a little bit ahead of the curve in some other areas. But again, I don't want to discount the fact that reliance on third parties, we're going to talk later about, I don't want to be too much of a salesman and trying to sell our CBI red team. But if you're engaging on red team or pen testing opportunities, this is a huge opportunity for you to make sure that you're getting as much value and ROI on those relationships as possible. So good pen testing companies can really help operationalize the framework for you. All right, reporting of data is very important, all right? It was, to be honest with you, the biggest challenge that I found in rolling this stuff out early on a year or two ago. So let's talk about some of these categories. First of all, percentage of techniques tested. If you're only testing one thing, if you just start this thing and you test one thing, it's going to misconstrue the results, right? You need to gain a full percentage of certain techniques tested, and we're going to talk about prioritization there. But you need to get, as many tests as you can run to build an accurate baseline. Moving over into the gaps in detection and prevention, this is how you start to sell this thing to upper management and to other stakeholders in the organization. But this framework can help you identify the gaps in your controls, right? Detection and prevention and a number of other things, which will help you inevitably identify some overall risk. The fourth component there is what I like the best. It's the effectiveness of the controls. We now have an ability to evaluate the effectiveness of the controls, aka the investments that we have made in the organization against these viable probable attack scenarios. Okay, and we're going to show you some graphs here moving forward, which is a good transition to the effectiveness trending. So effectiveness trending is the ability for you to convey to the stakeholders in the organization, even at the board level, how well you're doing. What is this operationalizing of the MITRE ATT&CK Framework done for our ability to detect these malicious activities? Well, you should see some upward trending, or you might see some downward trending, but either way, we need to see effectiveness trending so that we can measure the value of this framework. One other thing that I discovered kind of out of surprise is we began to really kick this thing off a couple of years ago was overlapping tool coverage. We began to derive an understanding that certain tools we had in the organization were doing the same thing. Some of which were maybe doing things a little bit better, some things a little bit worse, but either way, we get overlapping tool coverage. And that, in the minds of a CFO or a CIO, is very important to understand if we are truly spending our money in the most effective way. So let's talk a little bit about evaluation of the effectiveness of your controls, okay? So this is this chart here, this bar chart, comes as a result of the work that we've done for organizations and a process that we've developed. But this chart excites me every time I see it. I've done this presentation a lot, but this chart is so beneficial because it gives us now a visual understanding of how we are ranking up across all these different attack categories and how well our controls are doing. So this was taken from a real organization, obviously sanitized and obfuscated, but what I wanted to show was that it's capable to get a relatively quick understanding of the effectiveness of your controls across these different control categories. So here we can see the effectiveness of an EDR tool is pretty impressive, right? It's that dark blue that's ranking up top. Where some of the other things that we have, which we may still need, like a proxy or something else, may not be as effective. In addition, we can see where antivirus stacks up, traditional AV, in comparison to some of the new EDR capabilities that are out there. So I love this. We present this at the board and not the board level, more so than the CISO level, and it helps significantly. And then with the, polling question number 3. All right. So again, with that effectiveness of controls in mind, we want to know what control do you feel is most effective in giving you the visibility of advanced attacks in your environment? I'm not talking, a little signature that's triggered off from your traditional antivirus. I want to understand your ability to see an advanced attack using some of these different controls. So, Eric?
Yeah, we'll bring it back to me. So I will get the poll launched. It's up and running. Votes are rolling in. So, Shaun, I guess question for you as I'm thinking about this and thinking about all these different controls. Do you see that these are pretty consistent across different organizations, or is this going to be different with every single group and every sort of scenario that people are running into?
I think it's gonna be different. I think you see some things, that all organizations will mostly have event logs and network IDS, IPS, and firewall and traditional AV, but it's also based on, again, the market, the industry that you're operating in. Our small to medium-sized businesses are going to struggle to get the budget for a full-blown SIM and EDR solution, but that's changing. EDR is changing the game in regards to what small businesses aren't able to do.
So here are the poll results.
All right, good. Right in line with what I was hoping to see. SIM is extremely effective. EDR is extremely effective. We caught those notes early on, and it's really going to be instrumental to your team. Now, what we're going to show you a little bit here later on is that if you don't have a full-blown budget for a SIM tool, there's things that you can do without breaking the bank. There's even some open source opportunities for organizations to take advantage of to at least get the ball rolling and the momentum flowing. So good results there overall, and great to see. So here we break down the control effectiveness based on one of the MITRE ATT&CK categories. So initial access, which is what I kind of emphasize most companies to really focus in on the best that they can, because it's relatively easy to start here, and it's the first step that an attacker is going to take. So as you can see in the chart, you've got things like drive-by compromise, spear phishing links, spear phishing services, trusted relationships, valid accounts. These attacks, and we're going to capitalize on the valid account stuff later on, but now we can break things down to understand how well we're doing in certain categories, and again, how well those controls that we have are working or not. All right, risk reporting. So as we mentioned before, it's important to first gain as much coverage as you can in the high probability attack scenarios. I do not expect anybody to take all 256 of those different attacks and try to run them all. You're going to fail. Start out with the higher probability attacks first, leveraging that threat modeling that we talked about. We're going to cover that here moving forward, and then move on to maybe some more less severe or less probable scenarios. Gap analysis we talked about, and the average from scores. So you can come up with your own aggregate scoring, but what we need to understand is that we need to convey these results. We need to have measurable data that we can gauge our effectiveness of using this tool and the controls as well too. So you can base your averages on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 100 based on how granular you want to get. It's not rocket science at first. Don't make it rocket science. Just use some traditional averages, and you can correlate that data to get some general understanding of what each one of these control categories rank to. This is the effectiveness training or trending that we like to see, and really is instrumental for organizations to understand if this thing's working. So again, this is actually real data, sanitized and obfuscated, but what we did at one organization was started this thing off way back in 2017 when it was barely a thing, and we started to better understand as we move forward. In 2017 Q1, we didn't have much visibility or notification capabilities at all across these TTPs. But as we move forward and operationalizing this framework, guess what? We increased our visibility, our ability to detect, our ability to prevent, and really can show that data here using what we believe to be very meaningful metrics. All right, one other quick polling question. We want to understand which reporting element is most important for you. Gaps in detection and prevention, the overall risk, effectiveness of controls, or effectiveness trending. This one's generally an easy one, but I'm curious to see what the results are here, Eric.
Yeah, and I'm curious as well to see how people are prioritizing all of these different elements. If it were me, I would say 100% on all 4 different items. But yeah, it'll be cool to get your take as well, Shaun.
Yeah, everybody gravitates initially, I think, sometimes to overall risk, but I like the effectiveness of controls. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But I like effectiveness of controls primarily because we can use it with our current state and potential future state. What I mean by that is if you're making an investment or you're researching a new tool, a new EDR tool or technology, what a great opportunity to throw the MITRE ATT&CK framework at it. Maybe take the top 10 most viable attacks, throw it at that EDR tool, and begin to understand how well it would actually do in your environment based on the attacks that you will see.
All right, there we go. So we will share the results here, and we'll see gaps in detection and prevention coming in the top vote getter.
It's great. Yeah, I think that's extremely important, the gaps in detection and prevention. As I mentioned before, if you just identify one thing across this attack life cycle or path that these malicious adversaries will take, you'll then be informed, have the opportunity to jump in. Good stuff, Eric. Thank you very much. All right, where do I begin? Level one. I use the term crawl, walk, run a lot because I think it makes a lot of sense. For those of you that are just starting out and you may not have all the resources in the world to do this thing, what I recommend is that you just focus on an initial attack group. All right. And the good news is that the MITRE ATT&CK website can really give you some great knowledge in regards to what attack groups are out there, what attack categories and TTPs they align to. So for some companies, we've gone in and said, all right, you're in the manufacturing business, you're in the energy business. All right, what's the most prevalent attacking group out there? All right, it's APT19. And then what you can do in the MITRE site is look at all the attacks that APT19 runs. Start with those, right? Don't have to reinvent the wheel here or start by boiling the ocean. Maybe you are a more mid-level, mature organization and or you're gravitating from level 1 to level 2. Here, what we want you to do is map the intelligence data to the attacks that you are seeing in your environment, your threat data, all right? So if you've got a SOC team, if you've got a SIM and you have the capabilities, so a lot of SIMs today have attack integration built in, so you can basically in your SIM run a report that shows you what are the most widely used attacks in my environment against the attack framework. That's gold, right? Because then you can obviously then start operationalizing things into that spreadsheet or framework itself. In the run stage, this is where you're going to basically do as much as you can with everything that you have, all right? So taking incident response data, leveraging your own threat intelligence subscriptions and custom OSINT, leveraging those alerts, and or your organization's historic information, which is very good as well too. Sometimes you can take historic information, historic incidents is what we're talking about there in level 2 and take some of that as well. But that's the crawl, walk, run process. All right, this might be the last polling question, but what level of threat intelligence do you have today? Some people don't have anything, and by that I mean Google, right? You might have to Google whatever's going on. You might have some cool dedicated threat intel service like Recorded Future or Brand Protect. You might have an outsourced MSS and or your own threat intelligence feeds. So, Eric, take it away.
Yeah, we'll get that poll launched and up and running. I see the votes pouring in on that as well. Shaun, what would you say are some of the risks associated with just not having anything in place and just relying on simple Google search?
It's a starting point. It's unfortunately a starting point for most organizations. We don't go from 0 to hero in most situations. So sometimes we just have to do some rudimentary Google searching. So as an example, understanding what attack groups are focused in on certain industry verticals via Google searches. But really, honestly, some of these dedicated threat intelligence services have come light years from where they were a few years ago and really have upped the game in regards to providing you some instrumental data that you can leverage in your organization more efficiently.
All right, fantastic. Well, in any case, you can't deny the hustle. So some people are using Google, and we'll help them get on the more advanced track. But pretty diverse blend here.
It is, as I would expect. Threat intelligence feeds like ISAC and some of that stuff are fantastic. So, okay, good stuff. All right, so just looking through the process here in kind of a workflow summarized perspective. First, you need to determine your detection capabilities. All right, so what do you have out there that can help identify these attacks? SIM, EDR, AV, IDS, IPS, all these great things. MSS providers as well. Start with a spreadsheet. Just create a simple little spreadsheet. There's some templates out there that you can start from that we're going to include later on in this presentation in the resources section. But again, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Just start with something simple. What's interesting is the MITRE ATT&CK group or the MITRE group has an attack conference that occurs every year. And last year's conference, some of the discussions just emphasize the benefits of starting with Excel, which you never hear. Like, when does anybody tell you, hey, I've got a lot of data I need to churn through, I'm going to use Excel? No, but it's a great starting point, and will help kickstart things and really be a catalyst to moving into some more commercial opportunities later on. Got to get some threat modeling done. Don't make it crazy. Just start with, again, the building blocks, whether that's Google searching or looking at the attack website to understand those groups. Red Canary, I'm going to talk about later, a fantastic organization that has really helped to accelerate the industry's focus on attack. They've got some great reports, and one of the reports they come out with is an industry vertical understanding of the prioritized and probable attacks for your scenario. So that's a great point to start as well. Do it. Get it executed. Get the wings off, or get off the runway here. Even if your training wheels are on, that's all right. What you're going to find, as we have found with most of the organizations that we've worked here, is there'll be a little bit of initial pain in getting this thing forward, but not much. You're going to get a lot of stakeholder support. People will begin, if you leverage this thing properly, to believe in this program and support in the initiatives required. So just get it started. And then obviously we have to report the data. All right, we talked about some of those reporting capabilities and analytics that you should be focused in on. All right, automation is important, right? Everybody loves automation. I believe that automation is important to understanding these risks against these viable advanced attacks. And you've got a blend of things that you can choose from. You know, on the open source side, you've got the Atomic Red Team scripts. Basically, the Atomic Red Team scripts are a group of PowerShell attacks that you can run without having a crazy knowledge or skill set on running attacks. You just run the PowerShell attack. It'll run it in somewhat of a simulated way, not in a non-intrusive way. And that really helps a lot of organizations get through that skill set deficiency or gap. And that's why I mentioned earlier, you don't need a crazy, sophisticated red team internally to do this stuff. There's some other things out there like Caldera and Meta. And on the commercial side, we're really starting to see an increase in vendors understanding the importance of the MITRE ATT&CK Framework. All right, but I've seen a huge shift even in the last year of SIM providers, EDR providers, all sorts of people and companies that now integrate the MITRE ATT&CK Framework into their tools. And then red teams, as I mentioned before, I think it's really important that organizations push their red team vendors as absolutely hard as they can, all right? Because no longer, in my opinion, is it sufficient to just conduct a traditional pen test. A traditional pen test is about breaking in, finding these advanced vulnerabilities, and quantifying them in a prescriptive way in the report. That's good. We still need to do that. But it's a whole different scenario when we are now able to better evaluate the effectiveness of your controls by working a little closer together and leveraging things like the MITRE ATT&CK Framework to give you a platform for taking things over after we leave, all right? So a good red team will adhere to the attack framework. They'll work in more of a little bit more of a collaborative fashion to understand, hey, we ran this lateral movement attack or a password spraying attack. Were you able to detect that? And then quantifying and correlating that in the report accordingly. So, all right, real quickly, last slide before our break here, the attack framework evolution. This thing is dynamic. There's so much support from the community and from MITRE in moving this thing forward because we're all realizing the benefit and the value here. So, the evolution of attack. First, on the left there's some other attack frameworks that you should be aware of. Attack Cloud, Mobile, Linux, ICS, and OT. These things are designed specifically for those environments. The level of maturity on the Cloud, Mobile, Linux, and ICS side is not all there yet. It's maturing. It's certainly an evolution, but it's nowhere near where the enterprise attack is as far as level of maturity. Now, when you look at the sub-techniques, there's a new beta for the MITRE ATT&CK Framework that's in process right now. You can actually see the beta. And basically what it does is it shows techniques that are used as part of other attack vectors, and we call those sub-techniques. Then what they do is they map these sub-techniques to other attack vectors. So there's roughly 260 different sub-techniques today. That's going to increase in volume as this thing matures. But now it gets you the ability to map some things that might be associated with other attacks and understand some of the other intricacies or sub-techniques that are ran as part of those higher control categories. I'm going to get the lab set up. Basically, this is just a quick little review of running an attack, very viable and probable attack that we still run quite consistently today. Show you a little bit. You're going to take some knowledge from that in of itself. You'll be able to do this stuff on your own, and we'll talk about some of that later. And then we're going to see how running attacks correlates to the attack framework and how we can identify some of this stuff. So. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming back from the well-needed 5-minute break. What we want to transition to now is like we mentioned, showing this stuff in action. All right, demonstration through a relatively simple lab scenario of what something relatively simple can equate to in regards to the compromise to your environment. And in addition, how do we use this with MITRE, right? How do we take this attack that we're going to run, be able to identify it, integrate it into the spreadsheet or our reporting mechanism, and go from there. So what we've got on the screen here, let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. That's a little better. Kali, right? The Swiss Army knife from a pen tester perspective. We use it. I'm going to show you a tool in there called Metasploit. It's 101 as it pertains to penetration testing, but not something that we use a lot on the red team here nowadays. It's easily detected by antivirus in most situations, and there's some other tools out there that are a bit more effective. However, for an organization like yourself or others that might not have the level of maturity that you need, Metasploit's a great place to start. It gives you some fundamentals, builds a foundation for understanding how you can use these things. So, all right, let's get started here. All right, what I want to do is walk you through a password spraying attack. All right, something that we use a lot. The ability to take one password and spray it across a number of different users or attempt to log in under a number of different users is very successful, a lot more than you would think. And the reason for that is because users use bad passwords, easily guessed passwords. We're going to highlight that here momentarily, but we're going to walk through what a simple ability to guess somebody's password to graduate into full domain compromise and how quickly that can take, or how quickly it takes, is going to be valuable. And then again, mapping it back. So we're going to use a module here in Metasploit to do this for us. It's an auxiliary scanner. All right. It's basically an SMB login scanner. And what it's going to do is we're going to feed it some options. All right. We're going to look at the options it has here. We're going to feed it some options. We're basically going to tell it to go out, scan the network, and see if you can guess some passwords. But in the interest of time, we're going to jump forward in a few different scenarios. So actually, I got to zoom this back out a little bit so we can see what's going on down here. First, we need to identify our network range. Now, usually what you do in this scenario is you would identify a network range, /24, 16, whatever range you're looking at. But again, in the interest of time here, we're going to assume that we already scan the entire environment. We're going to look at one host specifically here. And then we got to set some parameters. All right. What's the username we're going to try? Again, we're going to assume in the interest of time that we have a user in the environment called JSmith. All right. We have assumed that we've done, we're going to assume that we have done our due diligence in identifying the domain and entering in the domain and identifying that accordingly. Now, the password. So we're going to set the pass to, I'm telling you, seasonal passwords like spring 2020. They're gold in the hands of a malicious adversary or red team, because I guarantee you in an organization, maybe you got 10,000 employees, I guarantee you there are users using seasonal passwords in there. All right. I bet even, 0.5% to even 1% of those 10,000 users, we could guess their passwords just based on the fact that they're not practicing proper password hygiene. Even if you got a password complexity, policy in place that uppercase, lowercase, numeric, using things like this completely shoot a hole through that armor or that potentially false sense of security. So we're going to use SMB pass here of spring 2020, and then we're going to run this thing. All right, we're going to run it. And what do we see? All right, so we saw that the user, Jay Smith, has a successful password of spring 2020 on this host, on this 1.155 workstation. And guess what else? They've got local administrator rights. All right, so local admin rights. Obviously, for many of you, the risk with local admin, but having local administrator rights on a machine is very bad for a number of different reasons, but primarily because it gives us a stronger foothold into the environment. We can do things in the context of the system account or an admin account. As an example, we can scrape memory and do some bad things, which we are going to highlight here. So we've got our target, right? 1.155 is our target. What we want to do now is get a shell on that host. Now, there's a number of different shells that we use throughout our processes, our TTPs and the red team, amongst others. We're going to use something, again, it's relatively easily detected and not too much in use from a general malicious adversary perspective, but something that we still see, and that's called Meterpreter. So we're going to back out of this auxiliary scanner, and we're going to use an exploit here to take advantage, because we already know the username and password. We already know that they're local admin, so it's not hard to get a shell on here. And so what we're going to do is take advantage of little LOL, living off the land, right? PS exec is a tool that was designed to allow administrators and other services to interact with the machine and execute functions and programs and all sorts of different things, but it's certainly been used and weaponized in a lot of different ways. So same thing, we're going to show some options here. So we're going to set our R host to 192.168.1.155, as we know that's our host that has the access and authentication that we're looking for. And then same thing, we're going to set the SMB domain, win domain. We're going to set the SMB pass, spring 2020. We're going to set the SMB user to Jay Smith. So those are our parameters. Let's just do a quick little options look here and see if all looks good. Yes, all looks good. Let's run this and see what we see. All right, so we're going to run this exploit, see if this is successful in actually logging into this host under those credentials that we had. And lo and behold, there we go. We've got a Meterpreter session. All right, so in essence, that Meterpreter session, it's a shell, right? It's a shell that gives us full access into the environment. There's a lot of things that we can do within this shell. We can dump hashes, we can do all sorts of great stuff. But the context of this discussion in MITRE, we're going to follow the attack path here. So what we've done is exploited a valid account that's in the initial access, and now we're going to move over to some other things, all right, such as escalating our privileges and conducting some lateral movement. So first, let's get system. So that'll give us system level privileges on the host itself, and then I'm going to load a little tool here called incognito, old school, old G module that basically helps to take advantage of a vulnerability called token impersonation. So let me explain token impersonation first. Tokens are like cookies, all right? And basically they are a way that you can store authentication data or authentication info on a host. Basically, if you log into a host, you don't want to log in every single time, or every single time you need to interact with that host. You need something in there that says, yes, Jay Smith is logged onto this host. He's done so with proper credentials. Therefore, we don't have to ask him for his password all the time. Think of it, same context as a cookie. But tokens are bad because there are often higher privileged accounts in the environment that are going to do the same thing against your workstations, your endpoints, your servers. And if you have token impersonation enabled across the board, that is bad for a number of different reasons. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to show how we can list what tokens are enabled on this machine, and if any of them are of interest to us, maybe a domain admin account or higher privileged account, and then how we can impersonate that token to gain full privilege to the environment. So we've loaded this incognito tool. What we're going to do now is list the tokens that are enabled on this host. All right, so we're listing tokens here, and as we can see, this looks interesting, right? Now, in normal environments, not all, but in most environments, you're not going to see something as blatant as a administrator named account for their domain admin, but there's other ways that we can identify those privileges. But here we've got, what seemingly looks like a administrator level token here, and it's really easy to impersonate it. So we're just going to impersonate token. We're going to type in the information here of the token that we're looking to impersonate and click enter. And as you can see, we successfully impersonated that token, right? So what we can do now to confirm that or to do more nefarious things is drop into a shell. So now I'm on the actual shell of the system itself that we've compromised. And if I just want to see who I am indeed in the context of Windows Domain Admin. So that's game over, and you'd be surprised at how quick that can happen in many other environments that we do red teaming for. We do a ton of much more sophisticated and advanced attacks, but you got to follow as many attack paths as you can to derive as much value from these engagements. But this is one of the attack paths that we follow and is often enlightening for the organization. We can talk all day long about how to prohibit this or detect it and defend it, but in the interim, just in a GPO setting, you can prohibit the opportunity to provide token impersonation for domain admin accounts. It's usually not something that we see as a necessity. Obviously, test, but just a little tidbit in regards to this. So use your powers here for good, not for evil. Use them in the context of a lab rather than in a production environment. But let's shift gears a little bit and now focus on the MITRE perspective and how we can see this, all right? So the password spraying detection in some cases can be hard to identify. What you're looking at here is the Alienvault Dashboard. So again, there's a lot of commercial tools and a lot of open source tools. I'm pretty sure Alienvault has a great open source tool that you can start off with. And they do a really good job of giving you those alarms and notifications, right? Rather than a log buried in a log, we get a notification that, a series of events is aggregated to this one alert. So this is good, right? So, we can create, as you can see, a notification rule, fantastic. And in addition, you can see the rule attack ID. That's the second highlighted item there. That's the MITRE attack ID of this technique, right? So you can then click on that link and you can see here in the MITRE attack area what this is, what it maps to, general understanding, and now you can begin your correlation. So as I ran this valid account attack, I can mark our areas accordingly and move down the list of these other probable attack scenarios to start to define our initial access average score or the other scores throughout the control and the MITRE attack category. Meterpreter shells, as I mentioned before, are super easy to detect for the most part, but nonetheless, Defender was able to identify this activity. All right, it was able to see it, identify it, and that's of no surprise. But again, here we can see what it maps to, how it maps in addition. So token impersonation is interesting because this is token impersonation was not detected on the Alienvault SIM. And that's it's not a big deal. That's not the point of this exercise. This is actually to flush out the gaps, right? So no tool is perfect, no SIM is perfect, no EDR tool is perfect. But by being able to leverage this framework to identify the gaps where you can't see or you don't have visibility into, that's the whole point of this whole thing, is to be able to then build those areas of notification or awareness into areas that you currently cannot. All right, so we're rounding things out here, and from a summarized perspective, the MITRE attack framework can help you in so many different ways, right? The building of the more enhanced and effective awareness and detection capabilities, that's first and foremost. Eliminate those gaps that we just talked about and identified with token impersonation. Help evaluate the effectiveness of your controls and use that evaluation in proof of concepts, research and development of new vendor technologies that you might want to bring on board. We talked about the detection and gaps and controls. In addition, it's a huge mechanism to increasing your vulnerability management maturity model, all right? The ability to just run vulnerability scans versus being able to see advanced TTPs in your environment, even at the first level that we talked about earlier, just huge in our opinion. So what's important, when we talk about a risk-centric model is that this is Gartner information too. This is not just my subjective rudimentary analysis. By 2020, approximately 30% of organizations that will adopt this more risk-centric approach will basically have a lot less breaches. Okay, so we're going to see organizations adopt this more risk-centric approach, and as a result, we should identify the fact that an attacker is in our environment before things get really bad, and gives us the opportunity to inject techniques to eliminate their access and conduct the proper incident response and forensics. So just a few resources here. You'll have this information, but this is some stuff that we feel is going to really get you off the ground. All right, there's some good articles, there's some good videos, there's some good Excel spreadsheets and other things that you can leverage to just take your first deep dive into this framework. All right, so Eric, I think it's time for Q&A.
Yes, sir. And yeah, not currently seeing any Q&A inbound from the field, although people, I certainly encourage you, don't be shy, ask away, and you've got the expert right in front of you. In the meantime, I feel like you've given us the bottom line takeaways. Any additional final thoughts, or maybe the frequently asked questions that typically come up at the end of this kind of workshop that you'd like to address proactively?
Where do I start is usually the first thing, right? And as we mentioned, I think some of those resources that we've provided are good. Take that step-by-step process. First, evaluate the capabilities that you have to identify some of these things using the controls that you have in your environment. Build a start spreadsheet that you can use. Take advantage of the automation. I really emphasize that people should take a look at those atomic red team scripts. Absolutely instrumental in getting things moving. And if you're in a specific vertical that it aligns to, the mobile, the cloud, the ICS frameworks, take a look. And in addition, the question that I've been asked recently a lot is of the new beta with the sub techniques that's going to be released probably in a couple months here. Start slow. All right. If you don't dive into the sub techniques right away, if you're just trying to get this thing off the ground, start with the actual main techniques and then work your way down into the sub techniques as you can. But I'd wait until that beta gets flushed out into production. So those are some of the things generally that we're asked.
Yeah, good deal. And we did get one inbound question from the field, and it looks like we've got maybe a couple others rolling in. So first up, we're saying, do you have any recommendations on case scenarios or a book of MITRE framework end-to-end implementation? So if there's any kind of resource like that.
Katie Nichols was at MITRE, and I think she's moved to Red Canary now, has those specific elements, how you get this thing from an end-to-end scenario, what the expectations are from A to Z. And I think it's one of the links that I put, or the resources that we added in that slide before. If not, we can provide some supplemental material. But she's been, again, instrumental in helping to evangelize, in addition to filling in a lot of the blanks and the gaps with the framework itself. It's not perfect, right? The MITRE ATT&CK framework is not perfect, but it's the best thing that we have right now, and it's as close to perfect as perfect can be.
Okay, good deal. And yeah, love it. Looks like a couple other people had that same question as well. So yeah, echo your sentiments on Katie Nichols, and I will make sure that those resources are included in our follow-up. Another question, you mentioned that you don't use Kali or Metasploit too much. What other tools or methods are you using instead?
It's a good question. One easily. So we use Kali. We don't use Metasploit much, if at all anymore. And the reason is it's easily detectable now, and there's a lot of other different frameworks that are more meaningful. So there's a few things that we use, but it's generally custom C2 and open source C2 frameworks that are out there. So Shelter Pro is a paid version of Shelter, great obfuscation tool. Silent Trinity, great .NET language interpreter exploit capitalization framework. Silent Trinity is really good. We still use CrackMap.exec. CrackMap.exec is beneficial in a few different scenarios, but it's a tool that will allow you to kind of enumerate the environment based on some credentials that you might have and gain a further foothold in a more automated fashion. Another tool that we've been using that is pretty cool is a tool called LSASE. It's a new way to extract data from the LSA secrets and dumps that Mimikatz has traditionally been really well served at, but Mimikatz is easily detectable now. Yeah, that's about it. There's a couple others that we don't talk about too much. I'd be happy to talk to people on a one-by-one basis that are kind of our claim to fame. We build a lot of custom stuff ourselves, or we'll tweak and tune some of the open source stuff out there to our own liking.
All right, good deal. And hey, this is fun. I'm seeing more of these questions rolling in. We've got one around lateral movement. So do you recommend using Windows Firewall to prevent lateral movement? And if yes, what are your ideas on promoting that to the infrastructure team? You know, the management and logistics for large deployments around that seem kind of complex. You know, recommendations around using Windows Firewall to prevent lateral movement.
It's a great question. The quick answer is yes. One of the things that we feel would be so beneficial is to eliminate workstation to workstation communications. Why does one workstation need to talk to another workstation? And by that, I mean a laptop, desktop, general endpoint. Because there's so much harm that can be inflicted as a result of lateral movement by moving from workstation to workstation. So Windows Firewall is great for a number of reasons. First, because it is that crawl approach. Let's get something out there. It doesn't have to be this fancy, sophisticated commercial firewall. Windows Firewall does the job. Where else it can help with lateral movement, where we see attacks nowadays, especially when we talk about this remote access world that we're living in right now, are forced authentication attacks. So there's an attack where you can basically embed an image in an email, but it's not an image, it's an SMB hyperlink. And what it takes advantage of is Windows native willingness to send authentication credential data to anybody who asks it. So what happens is there's an SMB link in there, you right click the image, and then Windows tries to download that image by authenticating to an SMB server that we have on the internet. So essentially it sends us your username and your NTLM hash password. That is still kind of considered a lateral movement attack as we look to explore the footprint that we have. But yeah, Windows Firewall blocking 445 and 139 right there, that'd be gold. The recommendation that I have is just start off slowly, just get an access control list set up. Even out of the box, on the domain, off the domain, those Windows Firewall policies can be pretty effective in of themselves with just those. But lock it down best you can to prevent those workstation to workstation communications. You can really damper or hamper the ability for an attacker to move laterally that way.
All right, very nice. And we do have a couple more. So as it relates to the MITRE framework, do you know a scoring system similar to the OWASP risk ranking as a way to rank the various attacks from low to high?
That's a tough one. If I'm understanding the context of the question properly, it's like, can we use some standard framework as it pertains to attack like we do with OWASP and CVSS and things of that nature? Currently today, based on what I know, the answer is no. There's no real fundamental standard scoring mechanism in regards to those low, medium, and high scenarios. Now, I think I've heard a little chatter on advancing some of those capabilities for better scoring and correlation in some of the future versions, but today I don't think there's anything solid, because some vendors might look at some of those different things in a certain threshold, right, or a certain variance. Some EDR vendor might look at forced authentication or credential dumping in a different way that others do, unfortunately.
All right, and then a couple other questions, and I think this one is probably closely related. How do you recommend practically quantifying things like overall risk or effectiveness of controls? What actual numbers should we be using to measure effectiveness on things like that?
That's a great question. And so that's why that spreadsheet, in addition to the resources, will help you out there. But to be able to effectively quantify what our capabilities are, again, using MITRE, are going to be a little subjective. All right. So, looking at those elements we talked about earlier, like the difference in variation of importance between logging versus an alert, two totally different things. You need to be able to push towards that alerting, sirens going off, notifications. We have to get butts out of seats to do things. And if you're able to establish those thresholds, and in even a simple way, 0, 1, 2, and 3, you'll then, I believe, be able to more effectively quantify that data and also be able to better convey that to the executives. All right, because if you just show them, anybody looking at the attack framework spreadsheet in of itself, it's a lot to take in, right? So to quantify those metrics, you got to first start with the environmental variables that you're using and make sure that you can translate those to the higher ups in the organization properly.
All right, very good. And it looks like this is the final question from the field. Any experience with using Chaos Monkey?
No, I don't. I'm sure members of my team probably would, but definitely something I'm going to have to look up.
All right. Well, with that, I think we can wrap it up.
All right. Well, good stuff. Yeah, we appreciate everybody's time here today, certainly. Hopefully you discovered a lot, understood the precedence of a live demo, but more importantly, I think if you can hopefully see, I am very passionate about this thing because I see it work. I've seen it operationalized in organizations and take their game forward and moving the ball down the field in such a major way. When we come in as a red team and look at something 1 year and then a year later we come in after they've done, after they've implemented attack, it's a night and day difference. So hopefully you can see the value there too. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll talk soon.